Do we have an intrinsic need to suffer? If we could experience pleasure on tap, wouldn't we want to experience pleasure all the time? Not exactly. And we all kind of know this, but we may not know why. A clue to the answer can be found in why it is that we work so hard at video games. We like a little bit of resistance, not a lot of resistance, and we like to be teased. Video games provide us with a kind of instant gratification, but it's not really instant gratification. We might think instinctively that we want to have pleasure on tap and that we just want to hit that button and experience that rush. But in fact, we very quickly become bored of that situation. And if we have that situation, then we'll start looking for the harder mode. We'll dial it up to medium, then hard, then extreme. And people do this, and those modes are available precisely because we don't want pleasure on tap. But the opposite isn't true either. The kind of delayed gratification that we're accustomed to encountering in the world is more like an extreme form of delayed gratification where there's a lot more work involved and the payoff is significantly later. We naturally do this, and we naturally do this because competition for resources must necessarily be kind of extreme. Otherwise, everyone would be able to get what it is that they wanted. In other words, if we made college, if we made education and jobs like video games, then access to the things that we want would be a little bit too easy. That's part of the problem. So let's look a little bit more carefully at this. In video games, we are presented with something that is not only a form of delayed gratification, it's not only a form of a tease, and that's ultimately what it is. We like being teased with gratification, but we also like being teased with gratification in an aesthetic way. In other words, we like a certain amount of aesthetic fulfillment at the same time that we are pursuing a goal that is out of reach, but not too far out of reach. That's what constitutes the building blocks of a tease. So you have some form of aesthetic enjoyment, and you also have delayed gratification, but not too much. This ultimately explains part of why it is that we work so hard at video games and why it is that we enjoy them so much. Here's the second aspect. We enjoy being good at something. The act of exercising expertise is actually a fulfilling experience, regardless of what it might happen to be. Simply becoming good at something makes it enjoyable. It makes the practice of it enjoyable. So that's the second aspect of what's going on. The third has to do with fairness. We like fair situations. Fairness is ultimately related to the emotion of disgust. And so a situation that is perceived to be unfair is experienced as disgusting. Have you ever noticed that an unfair political situation at work, let's say, or in a relationship, or in a whatever, has a certain similarity to it to the experience of smelling a rotten banana or eating food that doesn't taste quite right? It's revolting in a certain way where we want to draw back and we experience disgust at what's going on. The same thing happens with fairness. So we want things to be fair. We experience disgust when they are not fair. Video games provide us with a situation that is fundamentally fair. Everyone is playing on the same field according to the same rules, adjudicated by a computer that is ultimately objective. And so we love these games because the games don't play games with us, so to speak. Now, let's return to the question of suffering. Why is it that we want to experience a little bit of suffering, but not too much? Is that true with everything? No, it certainly isn't. As an example, we like certain kinds of delayed gratification, but that's not true with everything. Sometimes we just want to clear the obstacle out of the way. How many people do you know who wear glasses or contacts and they willingly take them off occasionally because it's fun not to be able to see? It doesn't really happen, right? So that's one of those things that is just an obstacle. If I have, a pain in one of my legs, or I'm having difficulty seeing or difficulty hearing, that's not fun in the same way. That simply constitutes a kind of obstacle. Those obstacles are more present in the real world. We don't encounter that kind of thing very often in video games because people wouldn't put up with it. If you went into a certain area and you just couldn't see anything because it was blurry, or all of a sudden the sound went down to a level where you couldn't even understand the dialogue, we wouldn't tolerate that very well. People would complain. So it's not uniform. It interferes, and this is the key, that interferes with our experience of aesthetic fulfillment. And so, insofar as we can experience aesthetic fulfillment, we don't mind working a little bit at a game, especially a game that's fair. Finally, we can see another example of this in people who win the lottery. So, those who win the lottery experience a lot of improvement in their lives, obviously, but it's not long-lasting. It's not a permanent change. Oftentimes, that happiness spike is only about 6 months long. Studies have actually looked at this and tried to see, okay, what are the good things that can happen? What are the bad things that can happen to you in life? How good is it really to win the lottery? And people enjoy it. They enjoy it for a little while, but they don't enjoy it forever. We do like a little bit of a challenge. We do like a little bit of resistance to our desires, just not too much. This ultimately enables us to answer a question that is perplexing, but at the same time enticing, because artificial intelligence and the advances technologically that we are experiencing now and will experience in the future are slowly going to make our lives better, or at least give us the opportunity to make our lives better. It's going to give us the opportunity to remove obstacles and to have more pleasure on tap. The question is, what forms of pleasure will people actually be willing to accept? And what forms of utopia will they instinctively reject in favor of something that is more difficult? And this discussion hopefully gives us some of the seeds that are necessary to answer that question. So what will people do with AI when it's possible to bring pleasure on tap and remove a lot of the obstacles that we have right now? We'll make life into something like a video game with some resistance to gratification, but not too much. Something that is teasing, aesthetically enjoyable, and, insofar as we can make it, fair.